Good. We're recording. Yeah. You know,
Wow.
in for the first time in practically since we wrote it, really, I looked at our dissertation just to prepare for this conversation, you know. So that's been,
Yeah.
20 plus more, 20 years. And
Yeah.
wow, it's a piece of work. I
It
mean,
is a piece of work.
several layers to that. Do you remember how much time we spent on this thing? Insight dialogue,
Oh my gosh.
oh wow. Yeah. That
And to
recent.
have it be an online process too was really a pretty amazing experience. And while I feel like we were kind of, uh, laying a new trail in a way with our work, um, because what we now recognize is that the very things that we were trying to get the group to do are things that are being recognized as integral or teal kind of consciousness, which is a later level kind of process, and there just wasn't much of a field to put it in at the time. Meditating in a group together while you're having a conversation, that's not an easy thing to do. And then of course the online aspect is again a little, I don't know how we dreamed that up, but it was really amazing, I think, to this day.
Yeah, I think the thing is, at least my feeling about it is we didn't dream it up. We kind of stumbled into it. It was like sitting in the road and we almost fell over it.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like we were just doing exploring Bohemian dialogue. Remember, it started out you got interested in dialogue on your own. I got interested on my own.
Yeah.
We found each other like in the PhD program that we were both doing that. And so we started doing it together. And then the mindfulness came in. And then we both tasted
Yeah.
something. It's like, wow, this is really interesting. So we didn't dream it up. And to me, there's something that speaks of the authenticity of it that way. It wasn't concocted. It was
Yeah.
found. It was found.
No. Yeah. And then it was an experiment. It was an experiment in several ways. And one way was that uh, we wanted to do a joint dissertation, and that just simply wasn't allowed. And we had to jump all kinds of hoops to get to do that as a joint dissertation. And the only reason I contend that that ever happened was because CIIS had just gotten their accreditation, and they didn't have any of the rules or structures laid down yet. And that was when the most creative work of all came through, was the
Mhm.
next few years, our cohort, or the next few years. Those dissertations were fantastic because the creativity was allowed,
Mm,
you know.
that's interesting. Hmm.
So I think we were there just at the right time.
Hmm.
And then remember, we met we had uh, we made up our own methodology, and so we met with a methodologist. And remember, Elizabeth got this methodologist, and who is also a meditator, and she wished us luck. I can remember she wished us luck because she said, but there have been several people that have used that methodology since then
No, really.
in
Wow.
their own dissertations. Yes.
Did they do all those
Yes.
sweeps, all those content sweeps, and all those suffering and impermanence sweeps and stuff?
Well, some of them did them. Some of them did them in a face-to-face format rather than an online format.
Hmm. Hmm.
So they didn't have a lot of words to eliminate and all of that we had to go through, just so that we didn't have a buildup of too many words. I talked to Father Thomas Keating once, and I was wanting to tell him what the later levels of development were like. So I was reading this off, and he sat there. I don't know if you know who Father Thomas Keating is, but he's a very famous priest, and he sat there and looked at me for a few minutes, and he leaned over to me and said, "Those are a lot of words," and That's what reminds me of our dissertation. Those were a lot of words. We just had to let some of them go because you get to the formless and there's not many words there.
But that, that was one of the things that was really lovely to
Yes, it was.
read in, going back to it, was to, touch those places where we were really sometimes awkwardly and sometimes, more smoothly trying to discover how we could do that with such, wasn't just sincerity, it was intensity. We were really going at that. And our, the people who were meditating with us, the two others in the group that called Pam and Rick in the, in the dissertation, the pseudonyms.
Yes. Yeah.
We all, I would say, worked so hard, but we practiced a lot. We really engaged in a lot of online insight dialogues where we were just the text, just this word and this word and this word, and just like rereading and contemplating and going back to it, just in the insight dialogue, without the insight dialogic inquiry, which then brought us to the text again and again, again. But just even the amount of
again and again
practice, just incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And exciting.
Yeah, it was. And I can remember that's the first time I really understood that I owned my words and that I had to let go of my ownership of words. And that was a shock to me because I'd never thought before that a person would have an ownership to their words. But I can remember a few times when you swept some of my words out of there and it was like, ouch, put those back in. Those are my words. You can't take them away from me. And that was a very important lesson for me to learn, that words are just words. They're, it's not an ownership thing, but you don't know it until you have somebody to bounce this off from and have somebody alter your words or change your words or take some of them away before you realize how intensely you feel that they're yours, even though, that attachment to your own words was something I learned a lot about in that dissertation.
Yeah. And what was also interesting to me was the scope of what we did. I guess because we had to, not only was insight dialogue in that sense new, the insight dialogic inquiry as a defined methodology was new, and the research paradigm, the deconceptive paradigm was new. And even the things, we had to still have references to where, the ground we were coming up out of. So we were reaching out to reference other forms of research and other, let's say, spiritual speaking and listening practices, Quakers and so on, and other aspects of online community, online development. All these pieces, we were then, even in our references, we're drawing on mostly also very edgy new stuff, with some exceptions like the Quakers. And God, what a thing to weave together and try to present a holistic body of work.
Oh, and you've helped make that endure. You really have just brought that to your own level and done so much teaching with it, Greg. It's been beautiful that you've been able to use that as so much of the part of your spiritual teaching. I've heard so many people tell me what a wonderful thing that was for them, the way that you taught that and worked with it with people. So, and I worked with it in Pacific Interval for quite a few years too. I used the more of a larger collective with 10, 20, 30, 25 sometimes people in the group.
Uh-huh.
And I found that sometimes we would get it rolling, so that there was a sense of flow, amongst everybody, but that wasn't always so easy to do. So it was, the more people, the more difficult. So you kind of stayed with the smaller group, and I think you made more progress because of that.
Yeah, yeah, I think that helped. And also the practice developed as I was teaching it into a much more formed kind of practice. As a teacher, I was very present. I
Mm-hmm.
would ring the bell to bring people back to the pause, back to settle. Of course, I changed.
Yeah.
The guidelines developed quite a bit from our earlier work, but
Oh, sure.
but
Yeah.
the sense of helping sustain and develop the meditative qualities while listening and speaking, um, that kind of support, I think, helped a lot. And then I suspect also the focus on the Buddhist wisdom teachings explicitly, because when we were working, it was always whatever's emergent. And
Yeah.
rereading it, that was one of the things that was both exciting to me and kind of interesting, because intellectually I remembered it, but to go back into and see what the effect was of, we don't know where we're going, we're just sort of dialoguing, we'll see what comes up, and it was always like
Yeah.
that, and
Yeah.
now I teach with dropping the seed of the Buddha Dhamma like right into that mindful moment of relational contact. And that provides a kind of
Uh-huh.
catalyst for going where the mind maybe wouldn't have gone because it didn't have that, let's say, the Buddha's background. It didn't have that, the wisdom had not yet emerged as clear to them. And this said, look over here and look at your experience right now, but look at it in terms of this, through this frame. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that helped people. It certainly helped me touch something. But I was really interested to see and kind of impressed, really, with the pure emergence of our earlier work.
We did. I mean, that was one of the mainstays of the dialogue. And I think that Bohm supported that a lot too,
Very much.
even in his guidelines. And so we got that very much from him. And
Right.
so he had a meditative quality to the stuff that he did, but it wasn't really mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And the mindfulness, I think, was such a good fit with that. And of course, that's what you brought. It was that whole background for our whole cohort. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a really great teaching for all of us, I think. So
yeah, Bohm had the
yeah.
notion of consciousness observing itself, but it wasn't
Yeah.
just the individual consciousness. You were watching the group, and I don't know if he would say group consciousness, but the emergent features of all of us looking at consciousness at once. I don't know whether he conceived of a group consciousness. Do you think he did?
I don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know. But being aware that you're aware is a very late quality developmentally.
Mm-hmm.
It happens in our third tier, in the third tier research that I've done. And we call that third tier meta-aware, because it's awareness of awareness that starts arising, and people would begin. And that's the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th stages, and it matures into the 12th stage, and it starts spontaneously and in your everyday life in the 9th stage. So those are rare stages, and we don't have very many people that make it there, less than less than 2% probably, somewhere around in there. So I suspect that Bohm had some capacities that were later than most people's. When just by becoming interested, as a physicist, becoming interested in dialogue is a rare thing anyway. So he was not an ordinary man, to say the least. And it was so well fit to, you know, what we were trying to work with, a collective experience of everything. Our cohort was very collectively oriented, and you know, we made a collective methodology, and we did a collective dissertation, and we used mindfulness in a collective sense, and I think the experiment was great. And you know, they're doing all kinds of those sorts of things now. I don't know if you've heard of circling. Circling is a really important thing that's coming up a lot these days, and there are quite a few processes like that that seem to be people seem to be really delving into quite a good deal now.
Right.
And so I think ours was one of the earliest forms of that, but I don't know if those are mostly meditative or not, the ones that are coming up. I think that we added the meditative aspect of it. And I do suspect that, that getting that sense of being aware that you're aware is, you know, the kind of going beyond time thing is the process that is the beginning of something out of the ordinary, and yet so incredibly ordinary that you can't hardly say it's not ordinary. So I think we got to quite a bit of that during that time.
Yeah, moment at a time.
Yeah.
The sense of kind of moving in with precision, with the language and with just watching the mind instant by instant with the text. It was quite exquisite, really.
And watching even the tiniest reactions that were going on, and just being with it and allowing them to be there. And that was a really good process for me, to have a quiet time, and yet to do that in the view of somebody else really puts a vulnerability to it that is really quite a beautiful thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So it really, really brought a depth to that practice, I think, that was not anything that I certainly couldn't have predicted or expected it.
Absolutely. I have that feeling so strongly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't pre-think it. And I have felt that all the way along, you know, in our early work, but also as it evolved through all these retreats I taught, I kept coming to places that were like grand or remarkable or subtle or found or illuminated, and saying, where did this come from? You know, it's been a process of witnessing, and you know, as distinct from, say, making, and and it continues. What I'm saying is just like, just always kind of new, like, where's that going now? And it keeps it really interesting.
It does, especially when you move it out of the dialogue process and realize that the whole world is nothing but one big dialogue, and there you are in it doing insight dialogue, whether they are or not. You just can't help but get insight and be in the moment with it. And as Dan Brown says, it just turns out being awareness, liveliness, simultaneously to being aware. So it's a very interesting experience to continue on with that. And and the practice itself is song-alike, and yet, you know, at some point you take the practice off the pillow, and it becomes a part of your life, and that's how I felt about the insight dialogue, because you know, practice means that at some point you don't have to practice anymore. It just becomes a part of you, and that did happen to me. I really was able to, through the years, even though I may not have been in a practice dialogue group as much as you, we did it during our GTC program, but I just found myself being, you know, aware of the, you know, when talking. It's harder when you're talking, you know, to maintain a mindfulness when you're, especially when you're talking out loud. But there is that great witness that certainly is aware of your own awareness of that talking. So, and words begin to just kind of flow at that point where you aren't hardly the sayer or the doer. They just kind of come the way they come, and there's not a lot you can do about it, you know. So, but that all started all those years ago in that insight dialogue, when we, you know, we would have the face-to-face ones, but then we also had the online ones. And we didn't have Zoom then, and we didn't have Google Docs, and we didn't have, I don't know how we managed to find the technology where we could even do this stuff. I mean, it was a miracle to have anything where I could read your text in the moment. We used to do these
AOL
forums, and then, yeah, and then we would refresh our screen to see what the next person said, you know. That was a technology we used at the time, all those years ago. You forget when,
Yeah.
you know, when you've got technology that is so much more, there's so many things we had to learn to be creative with.
Yeah.
You know, the technology, the speech, the mindfulness, the dialogue, the face-to-face dialogue, and then the culminating retreat at Barrie, where we had Goldberg.
Oh, Joseph Goldstein came once a day.
Joseph Goldman, yeah,
Yeah,
came once a day and sat in with us, and yeah, we had a dialogue once a day, and then he would come over to the dialogue each time and sit with us, and so we had a lot of experimentation going on there. And I remember the warm floors. That was a meditative floor where you didn't walk and get cold feet, which was a shock to me to have a warm floor like that. Funny the things you remember. Talk about a concrete experience, you know, your feet.
Right.
Your feet are on the ground and they're warm.
Yeah, all these years later, 20 years later, I'm, you know, I teach there every year, sometimes 2-3 times a year still.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful for having engaged with you and had this thing emerge together. So
it is really fun to It is fun to reflect on it after, well, it's been, I guess we graduated in 1998. So in a few months, it will be 20 years.
Yeah, well, I think 97 was when we finished the dissertation. So it's been 20 years now.
Yeah. 20 years. Wow.
20 years. Wow.
That went by awful fast, Greg.
Welcome to my world. Yeah, the world where death is always over your shoulder, huh?
That's right. Yeah.